For more than 4 billion years, the Earth has made an annual orbit around the Sun. For the past 128 years, those orbits have been reflected in the annual arrival and departure of students in the Peoria Unified School District. Long-term residents and employees of the district have seen great changes during that century and a quarter, but it is safe to say that no one has experienced anything quite like last year. But through it all, through the struggles and successes, protests and promotions, we never lost track of why we are here and who we are fighting for. Every student, every day. And it all starts with the power of one. One teacher, one administrator, one staff member, one person dedicated to making a difference. One person to offer help when it is needed. One person to supply hope where there is none. One person being there when nobody else was. One person who believes that our students will shape the future. One person, one student, our future. In a district with over 37,000 students and nearly 4,000 employees, it would be easy to be a face in the crowd. But that isn't what Peoria is about. Every one of you is here to make a difference, to be the one person each student needs so they can be the best person they can be. One person to help shape them so they can shape the future. Be the power of one.
From an early age, we're taught the basics of budgeting from our family. Do your chores and earn an allowance. Save what you earn so that you can pay for what you need and hopefully have some left over for a rainy day. Those lessons carry over to when we're adults and earn a salary and pay bills every month. School finance isn't so simple, and few have a complete understanding of how it works. In the next few minutes, I'm going to provide a crash course in school finance to help you better understand how our schools are funded. Schools receive their funding from the following sources: local property owners, the state of Arizona, and the federal government. Local and state sources provide about 90% of the funding, and around 10% comes from the federal government. But here's where it starts to get complicated. Every dollar that comes into our schools has rules attached to it that mandate how it can be spent. Funds from the state are split into two buckets: maintenance and operations in one bucket and capital in another, with 97% of the funds in maintenance and operations and 3% of the funds in capital. Maintenance and operations funds pay for daily operations of our schools, including salaries, transportation, utilities, and general supplies like paper. Capital funds pay for durable items that are owned or used by the school for many years, like buildings, furniture, buses, textbooks, and technology. All districts are required to have a balanced budget and cannot spend more than is provided in the two buckets. If the money in either of the buckets is not enough to meet the needs of our students, the district can ask the local community to pass an override or a bond. Overrides and bonds are different, and the funds they generate add to the different buckets. Overrides are for the maintenance and operations bucket, and thanks to our community, an override passed in November 2015, which allowed us to bring back free all-day kindergarten and provide salary increases for our staff, as well as support invaluable resources, such as nurses, arts education, reading programs, gifted education, athletics, and extracurricular activities. With voter approval, the Peoria Unified School District may also sell bonds, but cannot exceed a set amount. They work similar to a line of credit and fund capital projects that have a useful life longer than 5 years. Throughout the history of Peoria Unified, our community has passed bonds to pay for necessary expenditures that were not funded through our annual budget. Recently, a group of Peoria community members conducted a study of our present and future capital needs and held public meetings to evaluate the need to go out for a bond in 2018. Based on the advisory groups and district administration's recommendations, our governing board voted unanimously to approve a bond election in November to fund facility upgrades at our older schools, arts education equipment and technology for our students, improvements to our career and technical education facilities, new buses, and the construction of a new elementary and a new high school. Most importantly for our community, the bonds are structured so that the secondary bond tax rate will stay at or below current levels. This continues Peoria Unified's commitment to providing a world-class education to our students while also being responsible stewards of the funding provided by our community. More details about the bond can be found on our website. Does school finance make more sense now? I hope so. But if you still have questions or want more information, you can find all of the details of our past and present budgets and expenditures online, or just give us a call.
are situated to get started a few minutes behind. I do want to acknowledge our superintendent. Superintendent Ms. Linda Pellis-Thompson's out of town on a family event, and Miss Judy Doan was in an accident, so we wish her well as soon as possible. So she will not be joining us this evening. But everybody is here, and I appreciate everybody joining us in the room as well as live streaming. And we're going to go ahead and start the meeting at 6:08. May I please have everybody stand for a moment of silence? And Ms. Gadriel Curry from Ironwood High School, and a senior, will be joining us to lead the pledge.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much for that. Please be seated. And we're going to go ahead and start with item number 3.1, address agenda items not on public comment, not on the agenda. We don't have any at this time other than two that will be addressed on future agenda items. The first, we're going to start with Ms. Danielle Airy with staff recognitions.
Well, good evening, President Seja Martinez, members of the board, and Mr. Steve Savoy. We're so glad to have you, our Deputy Superintendent, here joining us this evening. Well, this evening we are here to highlight the achievements of our phenomenal Career and Technical Education Program, or as you all know it, CTE. Honestly, this evening I'm not sure that we would have enough time for me to go on and on and on about the phenomenal work that takes place as a part of our CTE program. Board members, Mr. Savoy, I know you all know that, and our audience certainly joining us at home, and those in the audience who have joined with us here hopefully have heard about the tremendous opportunities that we provide for students who are a part of our CTE program. We know it here, but it's always great when we can share some of the recognition that our students and our educators are receiving at the national level. So I have those wonderful awards to share with you this evening. You should have in front of you, to our board members, a program that lists all of the achievements that were received over the last school year. So this is certainly just a highlight of some of those students, and we're of course so very proud of so many of them. And we have a couple of them who we've invited here this evening to share a little bit more about what they have accomplished over the last school year. If I could ask Galadriel Curry to stand once again, and of course you heard her lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, but you're going to want to know a little bit more about this young lady. She earned second place in the Future Business Leader event at Nationals, which included a rigorous interview process. Galadriel also ran a campaign and earned the coveted title of FBLA National Treasurer. And it's really just a remarkable opportunity to get to compete at that level and, of course, hold a national office as Galadriel has accomplished. So really just tremendous achievements, and we're all so very proud of you, Galadriel. If we can give her a big round of applause. And we'll invite her back up here at the end of these remarks. I would also be remiss if I did not mention another group of students, also from Ironwood High School, Paige Duncan, Casey Nyquist, and Sydney Roach, all in the Educators Rising program. This is a program that's dominated by students in other states, but having 4 of our very own students placed in the top 10 is really, placed in the top 10 is worth an honorable mention. So we wanted to make sure that we provided you with that highlight, because there are more than 12,000 high school students that competed in 150 different events at this conference. So it's quite the achievement even to just compete at this level. So we're really proud of all of our Ironwood students and their achievements at that level. And the success of these students would not be made possible without the support of our dedicated advisors. And we have a number of them who have joined us tonight. And so I'd like to take a quick moment to recognize them as well. Captain Camella, who serves, I believe was sitting over here. Yes, Captain Camella, he serves as our fire science instructor at Sunrise Mountain High School. So we'd like to recognize him for the Advanced CTE Excellence in Action Award that he received. And we know it certainly is very well deserved. So if we could give Captain Camella a big round of applause. Also, I believe, possibly hiding behind me or over my shoulder here this evening, Lieutenant Colonel Raul Zamora, who leads up the Cactus High School Air Force JROTC program. They received the Region 4 Junior ROTC Outstanding Instructor Award. So congratulations to you and to your students. And are there any students in the audience that joined us that I possibly missed this evening? I just want to make sure there wasn't anyone that snuck in that I didn't get the opportunity to highlight. But to all of those students that competed at the national level, and of course to our instructors that were recipients of awards last year, as I said, we are just so very proud of our CTE program. We know it's really a shining star here in the Peoria Unified School District, known around the state and now around the nation as well. So a big round of applause for all of those students and teachers that participate in this program at the national level. We can give them a round of applause. And one other I didn't get the opportunity to highlight. I thought I saw her, Dr. Patty Beltram. Would you stand? Dr. Beltram, of course, who leads our CTE program, and we appreciate her support, her guidance, and of course, her strong leadership to take us all to this level. So thank you so much for what you do, Dr. Beltram. We appreciate you. And at this time, if I might ask Captain Camilla Galadriel and I believe Lieutenant Colonel Zamora, if you might join me up at the podium here, and President Ceja Martinez, I will turn them over to you in case you have any remarks or comments for them.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for joining us again, and congratulations on all your efforts. We're going to go ahead and start off with Miss Connect.
Oh, excuse me. Congratulations to you all. Galadriel, that's fabulous that you are getting such incredible experiences that I know will take you far. What I used to say to my girls, I still say to my girls, is when you do stuff, you get to do stuff. And I'm sure you've gotten to meet incredible people and go to exciting places, and I know you'll continue to do that on your journey. Gentlemen, thank you for all you're doing for our students. And finally, how exciting that the Ed Rising program is so successful, because hopefully we can nurture those students into becoming educators in the future and bring them into the Peoria family. Outstanding. Thank you so much. You don't have to clap for me. but thanks anyway.
Yeah. Ms. Pangarelli.
Well, I just want to say also congratulations and thank you for all that you do for our students and for doing so well in competition. FBLA is very close to my heart. Our daughters were both in that, so appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Mr. Sandoval.
Thank you. No, agreed. Dr. Beltran, certainly your leadership, over the CTE program, the array of programs that CTE encompasses, from accounting to fire science, and certainly junior ROTC, and all the way to welding, is just amazing. Again, another one of the ways that our district, certainly puts all of our students in a position to be successful and certainly prepared for the 21st century workforce. Lieutenant Colonel Zamora, Captain Camilla, is that correct? Yes. Yes, no, thank you both. There is that saying that every student is one caring adult away from being a success story, and I'm sure you have certainly made many success stories with the students that have crossed your paths. So thank you for your commitment to our kids.
And Mr. Savoy, would you like to add anything? Okay. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we appreciate the value you bring back to our school district. Thank you again. Thank you very much. We are now moving on to board recognitions, and I would like to start off first. We have two faces I would like to highlight today. Mr. Savoy, as Deputy Superintendent, we have the honor of serving next to you, so thank you again for helping us through this process tonight. And we also have a fellow governing board member from the Maricopa County Community College, G. McGrath. Thank you again for joining us tonight in your service to our community and our school district. All right, we'll start with Mr. Sandoval.
Thank you. So for me in Galadriel, congratulations again. I did, when I got word of your successes and accolades, I did, talk about those in a prior board meeting, so I was a little presumptuous, I guess, there, but congratulations. But in addition to that, I wanted to recognize really the city of Peoria and the partnership that we have with the city, and more specifically the youth council liaisons. I know we have a couple of individuals, a couple of students in Leah Gilbertson and Frank Johnson who are new to that program. But as of the first Arizona city to implement this liaison program, it's again invaluable. Certainly. Promotes, civic duty, and once again, just another partnership that truly helps us as a district broaden our bandwidth, and looking forward to really just understanding how we can, really look at that partnership and how we can grow it and to ensure that we enhance the student experience in an even, more thoughtful and broader way through that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pangarelli?
Nothing this evening.
Ms. Connect?
Yes, thank you. Last board meeting, we took the opportunity to wish a fond farewell to Chief Minter from the Peoria Police Department. And I just wanted to comment that I think it was the following day, or maybe no, it was a couple days later, Mr. Savoy attended the final United Community Action Network meeting and wished him another farewell. And then the day after that, there was a reception, and I wished him another farewell on behalf of the school district. And just to reiterate what a wonderful addition to our community he was, and how much we appreciated his partnership. And then last Tuesday night, the Rotary of Peoria put on an event at which they celebrated the service clubs from Centennial High School and Cactus High School. And I had the privilege of attending that event and wishing those students my congratulations and how excited I am that they're developing skills and moving forward to do really important things in the world. So kudos to Rotary of Peoria for all that they do for the students in our schools and throughout our community.
Thank you. And last, I would like to highlight two things. One, I had the opportunity to visit Desert Palms. It was my first visit ever to Desert Palms, and the leadership team and the teachers were phenomenal. What I really enjoyed is that they have a brand new initiative that they got with a grant to support families and the communities within, not only just the students, but how to support the families. So kudos to Desert Palms for taking that initiative. And during this week, we have Meet the Teacher Night. We have dedicated teachers, administrators, classified staff serving our community in a non-contract hour, giving their time. And I had the privilege to go over to my son's school, and I just know how much work they put into that. So thank you to every school district for doing that. All right, with that being said, we will continue to move on for a consent agenda. Any items need to be pulled. We do need 6.1, the Human Resources Report. Any other items? Okay. So just 6.1 needs to be pulled for review, and then I would need a motion for the consent.
I move that we approve the consent agenda minus 6.1.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Mr. Sandoval and a second by Ms. Pangarelli to approve the consent agenda item excluding 6.1. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much. Motion passes. 4 yays and 1 absentee with Ms. Stone. That does read 5-0, so we'll have to get that updated. And we'll go ahead and proceed to 6.1, Human Resources Report. We do have a request to address the governing board. Sarah Carranza? Carranza, thank you, I apologize.
All right, am I allowed to begin?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you, President Ceja Martinez, members of the board, and Mr. Savoy, who I have not had the opportunity to meet, but congratulations on your new appointment. I'm here to address you regarding my resignation. It was a timeline that I did not have control over, and per your document GCQC, I believe that I have an opportunity to ask you to waive my liquidated damages per other circumstances judged to be out of the control of the employee. So to paint you a picture, the timeline was I was interviewed by Arizona State University on Monday, August 13th. I was offered a position in the College of Teacher Prep on Tuesday, August 14th. I met with the wonderful Human Resource Department on Wednesday, August 15th. And that day I expressed that I wanted to resign because I was taking the position at ASU. That said, I knew that I couldn't exit immediately and start teaching my courses at ASU on the 16th, because that was the first day of school for them, because I wanted to allow Mr. Wooten, the principal at Calais High School, to find a replacement for me. So I agreed to stay on until tomorrow to present to you professionally my resignation and ask for your approval. But then since then, Mr. Wooten has been able to find somebody to replace me. So I've continued my professional responsibilities. I have left the classroom and my lesson plans for the rest of the semester in the hands of the new hire. And I am offering lesson plans with all the materials needed for next week for when the new hire begins. So I believe, like, we personalize instruction for our students, that I'm asking you to consider a personalization of my resignation and waive my liquidated damages. But that said, whether you do or not, I also wanted to come before you to just offer my sincere gratitude. It is a hard decision to break my contract, and I really admire this board. I have worked in many school districts across the state with very good reputations, but I've never seen a board be more compassionate towards teachers and to listen to the needs of teachers as well as to support the needs of students. So I stand before you with a sincere thank you for this short tenure that I've had here, and I also want to acknowledge the staff and administration at Kellis because they've made me a better teacher just in the 2 years that I've been there. Thank you for your time.
At this time, we'll ask for a governing board conversation. Mr. Sandoval?
Sarah, thank you. No, you're, no, you're.
I was told you guys weren't allowed to talk to me, so I stepped
When
away,
it's
sorry.
the good thing is when there's an agenda item.
Okay.
We can.
Oh, great, okay, I'll stand tall.
You're more comfortable.
Okay, no, I'm good.
I'm kidding. So first off, thank you. Again, it's you're right. I mean, it's our teachers and staff that make us look good as a district, and your situation to grow professionally. It's one of the things that I like to say that we hang our hat on, where we've helped you develop, along the way as you sat in the classroom within PUSD to be able to have this opportunity, to move on and forward. And it's, applauding what you do every day to and the many lives that you impact. It's, again, it's invaluable, selfless, and, certainly you're amongst all of our teachers and staff a tireless scholar. I will say this. I mean, this particular policy is one that I know that we have scheduled to pull and discuss for a future agenda, to take a look at this language too, situations like yours. But, thank you very much, for everything that you've done for us and our children. Just congratulations. Looking forward to your success.
Thank you.
Ms. Pingarelli? Ms. Connect?
No, I just want to thank you for your service to the district. I've made it clear that I wish we didn't have liquidated damages, and I'm very sorry that we do, but we do. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I echo the sentiment, appreciate the value that you've brought to our students and the relationships, because that's ultimately what's going to help them grow, and especially your colleagues. So I appreciate your professionalism, and at this time, a governing board has elected to discuss this policy in the future and hopes to serve our staff in a better way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I do need a motion for this item, 6.1, the HR report.
Make a motion to approve or move 6.1?
No, to pass it, to approve.
To move it for a vote. Not to pass it.
Well,
Actually, you know what?
in 6.1,
It's already in there.
Yeah, but it's okay. So I'll go ahead and, yeah. So I move to approve the 6.1 HR report as presented to us. Is there a second?
I will second it.
We have a motion by myself and a second by Ms. Pangarelli to approve the human resource report as presented. Motion passes 4-0 and 1 absent. Moving on to number 8.1, AZ Merit Proficiency Data for 2017 and 2018. Mr. Moss will be presenting. Thank you very much for your time and effort and the data.
You. Do it. Okay. Members of the governing board, President Martinez, Mr. Savoy, we're here to give you just an update on the AZ Merit update for 17 and 18. As you are aware, AZ Merit testing is part of state mandated testing. We do those tests in grades 3 through 8, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, English Language Arts, 10, 9, 10, and 11. Okay, this is not a change from what we've done in the past. The science test, and we'll get there, is not given at those times, and I'll give you some more information when we get to that point. Tests are given in the spring, usually 4 to 6 weeks before the end of the semester. In the spring for elementary students, and at the completion of course for high school students. Again, we do those both in the fall and the spring, and again 4 to 6 weeks before the end of the semester those tests are given. Okay? The test scores for the high schools do include both fall and spring assessment results for any of the high school subject matter, so it's not just the one spring assessment. I mention that because all of this information is available on the ADE website, but if you go choose and look, most of theirs just has spring assessment dates. It doesn't have both of them together, and so they may not be exactly the ones that are on the state on the ADE website. And the information that will be provided, and I apologize beforehand to anyone in the audience, when you put the numbers up there, they're going to look really small, and I'm going to tell you why we did that. But I want to explain quickly what the information here is. Each grade level, each subject matter will have 4 years of data. It will have a box containing numbers. Those numbers represent the percentage of students at that grade level who had scored at that proficiency level. The MP stands for minimally proficient, PP partially proficient, the P for proficient, and HP highly proficient. This is, again, information that's common as we go through the process. Each grade subject is between 2,300 to 2,500 students who actually take the test on a regular basis. And if people talk about passing rate, you hear them talk about passing rate. Passing rate would be the combination of both proficient and highly proficient numbers together. So just in quick numbers, 17 there has a 54 passing rate, has a 57 passing rate in 18. Okay? As I click to the next slide, again, I want to apologize to those in the audience trying to see what the numbers are. When we talk about providing data, we want to provide enough data to be clear and not too much data to make it look like that. I wanted to put it into the public record so someone could run the copy, take a look at it, and make it a little bit difficult to read here, but give them more information if they wanted to be able to look at it themselves and kind of go through with that information that goes along. In addition, I don't think you want to spend a long time talking about individual grade levels as we go through, so we're just going to kind of give you a general view, and then we'll make some comments about what the totals and what the kind of processes are or what the results are for the whole district at one time. We do use this this format with principals because it does two things for us. First, it allows us to compare year to year at each grade level. If you just go down from 15 to 16, 16 to 17, 17 to 18, but it also allows us to judge cohort or close to cohort achievement. For example, if you take 2015 third graders and you move at about a 45-degree angle there, they're actually fourth graders in 2016. So you're able to track them from third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade across the 4 years and see how that same group of students scored. Now, obviously, we have changes in kids, we have movement, but in general, we're talking about a cohort rate that's probably in the 75 to 85% range at each of those grade levels, so at least gives us an idea of what the cohort is doing as it progresses across the grade levels. Okay? Those are the English language arts scores. We have the math scores also, and again, it does the same, provides the same type of information. I'll give you a chance to take a look there in case you want to write down any numbers you want to ask about. These are the high school end of course assessments. The three math classes exist. Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 are on the left. ELA 9, ELA 10, ELA 11 are on the right. And again, the same type of process as you go through. You can do cohort comparisons. You can run year-to-year comparisons as they go down. Passing rates, minimally proficient rates. It gives you a bunch of information in that process. Science is actually called AIMS Science. It's not AZ Merit. It's going back to the old AIMS that we used to have in Arizona that used to run math and ELA also. Instead of using minimally proficient, we're using 1, 2, 3, 4. They actually use falls far below, approaches, meets, and exceeds. FAME scores, you've heard about those in the past. 1, 2, 3, 4 is essentially from the lowest to the highest as you go through there. You notice that there is data missing in 2018 because the state scores, again, have not been released. We've called twice to try to get a hold of them, even this morning, and they did not release them for consumption to us. They are passing rates there included also, and you can see the district scores compared to those across the bottom.
Could you address that again? Why are they saying that they can't give us the scores?
They just haven't released them. They're tied right now to the calculation of A through F labels. And so they keep some information back on the A through F labels, and they give us, for example, one of the questions, one of the points earning an A through F labels is you have to have above 83% passing rate. Well, where does 83% fall? Is that the top? Is that the middle? Is that the bottom? And when we asked and said, have you released this information? And I've talked with Ms. Davey directly, and she said, we haven't released that information publicly.
So that every school district in the state has its information, but they haven't been able to compile it to do a composite for the state.
Correct. But they have not released it. I'm sure they have it. They just haven't released it. We asked today, this morning.
Just getting clarity there.
I
Thank you very much.
Okay. These are the high school scores. You see it says grade 10. I'm going to tell you that they have a couple things that need to be clarified here on the high school scores. First, you say grade 10, and in reality, it is a biology test, okay? And because of scheduling, even with our own schedules, we have some kids take biology as 9th graders, some kids take it as 10th graders, and so they've begun to report the scores as cohort scores. They've begun to report them as cohort 2018, cohort 2019, cohort 2020, whoever takes that test at the current time. And this is a combination of all the cohorts, which would be, at this point in time, I think we're looking at 19, 20, and 21, depending upon what grade level the student was when they came to the school and having to take the biology class. Okay, again, haven't released the grade 10 or the biology scores on the AIM Science to the public, and it's not on the website anywhere. Okay. Some general comments about what we saw, what we see ourselves. First of all, in the elementary schools, scores remain generally flat based upon year-to-year comparisons. Are we seeing grade increases? No. Are we seeing grade decreases? No. Minor increases, minor decreases both exist in ELA and math. +5 and -5 are the biggest reductions in passing rates and biggest additions in passing rates at any one grade level. If you think about that, district-wide, 2,500 kids, it's approximately 100 to 125 kids who have fluctuated up and down, back and forth across the passing line, either positively or negatively. We continue to operate at all elementary grade levels, continue to score above the state average in both math and language arts. So we're better than the state in all subjects and all grade levels at the elementary schools. And in science, we had small declines in passing rates from year to year, 1 or 2%. And again, if you're talking about 25%, you're 2,500 kids, you're looking at 1% is about 25 to 50, 60 kids fluctuating up or down one way or the other. Okay? In the high school, I think things are a little bit more, we're a little bit more concerned. Math continued to produce passing rates above state average. Our Algebra 2 scores improved significantly, 10%. Language arts scores, I think, were disappointing as you take a look at them, as they remain flat, and in 2 courses actually fell below the state average, which is not common for us at all in any of the testing that we've had in the past. Science achievement fell slightly, but remains above what we believe to be above the projected state average. If you take a look at the state over the past few years, it fluctuates within 1 or 2 percentage points along the way. We don't think there's going to be a massive change in that number for elementary or for high school. Okay? I wanted to make one other comment before I turn it over to Dr. Bell. The board asked for specific information about high schools in specific courses and tried to get proficiency rates. And I want to caution the board on making some assumptions about comparing one school to the other in doing that, because proficiency rates are highly, highly, highly correlated to outside factors related to students, specifically SES and ethnicity make up approximately a 0.78 or 0.8 correlation between scores that go up. You have higher SES, lower ethnicity, scores go up. You have lower SES, higher ethnicity, your scores go down. What that means is that when you start to compare schools, you can't compare how one school did compared to the other school unless you also consider the demographics of that individual school and make a comparison in that way. And so we do that. We do provide to our schools, to our leadership, we do find demographically equal schools and do comparisons across the board. We do that for some of our schools in that process match up. But if you take a look at some of our schools, you can't compare without looking at the demographics of each of the schools also, because they are actually comparing apples and oranges just based upon the statistics across all the schools in the state of Arizona.
I appreciate you acknowledging that. I'm going to just put this out there. This is the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to need a full-on study session on all this data and conversation with everybody. But acknowledging that there are differences in demographics. Majority of our northern schools are high SES and have a different demographics than our southern schools. So it's another point to address as a district to close those gaps so that everybody has equal opportunity to the same opportunities to do well in any assessment they're giving. Thank you.
I think the question also, when we look at the data, and we have been spending quite a bit of time digging deeper into our data with our administrative team, with our teams here at the district office, and really trying to align our strategic efforts and our strategic plan and our projects to interrupt, if you will, flatlined scores, or certainly try to do better for students in both reading and math. So I'd like to spend just a moment to talk about some of our strategic efforts and initiatives associated with our schools. First of all, there is a focus on ELA, and including reading and mathematics for all grade levels. This year we have started with a new reading screener. It used to be a screener called Dibbles. We have now moved into an iReady diagnostic tool. All K-8 students by the end of next month will have established that baseline reading Lexile level, so that we can progress monitor that student's growth throughout the school year. So we are in the process of that assessment. We are focused on standards-based instruction and formative assessments through the PLC process. This is an investment in professional development for our instructional leaders, for our coaches, for our reading interventionists, and for teacher leaders who will be serving on learning teams at each site. We have kicked off our PLC learning process with Solution Tree already. Our trainer will be coming back in September and will be walking through us using a nuts and bolts process with our teams so that we can better unpack standards, develop common formative assessments so that we know exactly what it is students must know and be able to do, assess it informally with teacher-created assessments on a regular basis to determine what students learned it and who did not, and then most importantly, what are we going to do about it as a system, as a school, as a teacher, when students do not learn it or have demonstrated learning. We have to honor that student who did learn it and is ready for next steps in that child's educational process. So we are committed this year to that effort around our state standards and understanding what they really look like and are at that appropriate level of rigor in our classrooms.
Mrs. Cejar Martinez?
Thank you, Ms. Connect. Yes.
I'm curious, are you, when you look at the data, are you looking at the individual teachers which are experiencing the most success and tapping into their expertise so that they can share it, their practices and maybe their materials or whatever with other teachers?
We are. We have drilled down to not only with the proficiency data, which, like you mentioned, is the surface. We've drilled down into by students, by grade level teams, and we can look at the levels of student growth in teachers' classrooms and really work to identify teachers year after year that get amazing student growth from their kids.
And if I may, and you may already be doing this, I would also look from school to school and see if there are any cultural differences between the learning environments and, maybe some different approaches about the community, the school community that maybe are more inspirational or invigorating. I think that has a strong impact on student learning as well.
We agree. We do know through the school improvement process, every school has looked at their data, identified measurable goals in ELA reading and mathematics. Many of them have a cultural goal associated with learning and with sending a high expectation message to their community about learning, and this is what we're here to do. So they are beginning to finalize all of those goals, and we'll be working with our schools Monday and Tuesday to do so.
Yep. President Martinez.
Mr. Sandoval?
Thank you. Dr. Bell, thank you. So as I take a look at this bulleted list, the strategic efforts for student success, and Mrs. Connect may have, as she mentioned, the cultural dynamics, of our sites. That's what I don't see on here is, cultural competencies, the SEL, trauma, et cetera, how all that, right, impacts student learning. I think the data is great and we need to look at that, but until we humanize those numbers, where our mantra is every student, every day. And until that takes place, I think we, are kind of putting ourselves in a position to be doing a disservice for, our entire student body.
We're working on our social emotional learning efforts. We have a pretty comprehensive team working on that and taking a look at that. That also talks in large part to what we expect for all kids at Tier 1, not only in terms of student learning, but also social emotional learning, and how we can, in fact, level that playing field, if you will, when kids do have trauma or are concerned or have things going on in their lives. And so that's going on hand in hand in our strategic efforts. I did not include, I really wanted to kind of focus here on the reading and mathematics, but we're certainly working on that as well, and we would agree with you. Keep going. Okay. Many of you know I provided kind of regular reports. We took some certainly direction from our governing board and our team members. We have more and more teachers, and I can get you those numbers, trained in teaching reading effectively. We have our own trainers in our school district for teaching reading effectively. So we have sent our teachers, we started with a focus on K-3 and Title I. We sent them to ADE training and all summer, and currently we continue to offer good quality reading professional development and teaching reading, rather, professional development for our teachers. We are also really paying attention to core access for students. We recognize that, and we can drill down and look at that data around the gap that we have academically. Specifically, we've drilled down to look at ELL students and special education students, and we're looking at minutes of instruction and if they are achieving access to the general curriculum. So we're going essentially student by student through that schedule and comparing their service minutes in special education or the access minutes for ELL instruction, et cetera, to make sure that we're not pulling them from grade level curriculum, content and instruction, so that they have access to that grade level instruction in English, reading, and mathematics. So I was just at a school where they were working on that this morning. Finally, again, very intentional planning based upon student data. The iReady diagnostic will give us a great deal of information associated with not only the child's Lexile level, but also relative strengths and weaknesses of that child's reading abilities. There's the diagnostic piece. So there's a lot of information that's helpful to the teacher, to the PLC grade level team, and even a report for how parents can help the student at home. Students are then, through the system and through the teacher teams, actually grouped for certain skills that they need to focus on or standards that we need to repeat or bring back into the classroom for either small group instruction or in fact for whole group instruction. So this system, this intuitive system, helps us identify exactly where each and every kid is and what we can do to ensure greater success, particularly in reading. At the high school level, we are concerned about some of our trends there. In working with our principals and some teachers last year, we decided that we would commit to a system that would bring us together as opposed to individual schools purchasing various resources. So we began this summer in using a tool, it's called Edgenuity, so that students could gain credit and not repeat the same class with possibly the same results of failure or low achievement by taking the same course again the next semester. We want to progress our students through courses so they're able to maintain, earn credit, and maintain that pace toward graduation with their peer group. These systems and, in fact, our professional development, much like the PLC that I've already talked about, will have a huge focus on the state standards, really unpacking them with all of our high school teachers and developing, again, those common formative assessments. When students do not get it or understand or show mastery of the state standards, we as educators need to own that. And in fact, not just own it, but act upon it and do something about it. We can't simply continue and progress through the content in hopes that the kids will eventually catch up. At the high school level, it's typical that we know students are beginning to fail or be close to failure within the first 4 weeks of school. So we're going to be working system-wide on interventions that will make us stop and pay attention, reteach, reassess, so that if kids need more time, then we're going to be able to provide that. The first step, however, is understanding those standards, unpacking them as teachers, as teacher teams, and really developing common formative assessments to assess whether or not what they taught was actually learned. So this professional development effort is a focus on measuring student learning and progress monitoring throughout the school year. Finally, through this last effort with Edgenuity, we are seeing already with students enrolled in some flex school within a school type of models, more opportunities for them to demonstrate mastery in the core content in not only English and mathematics. There are other courses that we will be rolling out for students to be able to demonstrate mastery and earn credit, to accelerate their learning, to not fall behind their peer group, and maintain that pace toward graduation. Some of our teachers this summer utilized a blended learning model in summer school. That means that our students are able to have access to technology and to some of that software during their instructional day at school, as well as at home. So the learning does not stop in a semester or in a period of time for students to continue to demonstrate that mastery and progress through the course. In some cases, we're able to not only offer the credit, allow the student to accelerate through the system and earn the credit, but then to not wait until the next semester to start yet another course, but continue into the next course pathway through this system, so they're able to earn not just the credit they may have failed, but the subsequent credit in the same semester. Again, our focus is what's good for kids. How do we focus on those students demonstrating mastery so we can accelerate them toward graduation in quality programs?
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and start with board discussion. Mr. Sandoval, would you like to start us off?
Dr. Bell, thank you. Mr. Moss, thank you both. We have a tall task, as being the fourth largest district in the state of Arizona. So we have 37,000 plus that are within our arms and care. That said, you take a look at the numbers, from elementary to high school, we're a unified school district. So in my mind, we have a benefit, right, because of that collaboration. But there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. So can you talk about that a little bit? Do we have an opportunity with regard to how, the elementary schools communicate with the high schools, et cetera, and that whole transition, right? There's a lot going on in junior high and high school, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm not sure that's a part of our agenda this evening. However, for achievement purposes and looking at our data, we are organized in feeder patterns, and we are having conversations associated with this achievement data, as are these elementaries fit pretty cleanly in Peoria into that high school. I just had a conversation yesterday with Mr. Wooten and a Solution Tree representative who is helping us with PLCs, and we talked about that very thing, the idea that in some cases, which is what we've been looking at, we're much more successful, surprisingly successful, in 7th and 8th grade mathematics. And so then, what are we doing in that transition? And what's happening to, well, we know what's happening to kids as they transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. But all that said, what support do we need and what needs to happen as those kids move into those math classes, in this example in 9th grade, and immediately begin to struggle? So we have to plan for that as a system, as feeder patterns, and some of what we're trying to do here at our high school, that example of school within a school, identifying students at risk academically very early, and really owning the fact that if they haven't learned it, it's on us. That's probably a cultural shift as well.
Ms. Connect?
It's a good list of strategic efforts. I appreciate the work that's been put into this. The only thing that I would add is, and this relates to our personalized learning, that I think is the way to move forward. Not all children think the same way, have the same needs. Whether it's in elementary school or in high school, if we, the teachers or administrators, recognize that students are struggling, to have a conversation with the parents or with the student themselves and say, what's going on?
Right.
What's going on? Are you tired? Are you getting enough to eat? Are you not seeing well? There could be any number of learning disabilities that maybe haven't been found. So finding out what it is on the individual child's basis, that may be something that we can address and help a child to be successful.
Those relationships I know are critical.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a 6th grade classroom today at Cotton Bowl, and I just kind of wanted to hold that teacher up simply because of that rapport, the risk-taking, that classroom environment, kids saying, I don't know what the answer is, and working with the kid next to him to try to figure that out. That magic and those relationships that teachers are able to form with students are critical.
Find out what inspires, maybe find out what doesn't, or what turns a kid off. finding that out can save a whole lot of time and a whole lot of angst if we can just figure out the right buttons to push.
I agree. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Pingarelli?
Well, I just want to thank both you and Mr. Moss for the presentation. I just wanted to say I'm very happy that we have a superintendent that doesn't mind touching the third rail and bringing this out. I know we talk about every student every day that's ready to shape tomorrow, and this data does not show it by a long shot.
We've got some work to do for sure.
But I'm glad we're acknowledging it. I appreciate all the data that was presented. For the ELA for the 11th grade, I mean, that is down, it's flatlined at 25%. Science is 59% of our high school students, 41% pass. So 59% don't even have a basic understanding of science when they graduate. Science and math is important to critical thinking, and that will carry them through all other areas. In regards to, I did ask for the data to be separated for the high school, science and math and language arts by school, not to put one school or compete, pit one school against another. But one thing you did say is that we need to have high expectations, and that's high expectations of all students in all schools. Because if we don't have the high expectations for all the students, we're doing them a great disservice, particularly the ones that are having the most trouble. I come from a different perspective. I come from one of those families that was disadvantaged. I had a brother that OD'd. Okay, I know all these things that happen. So that's why I'm compassionate, but we have to hold every school to high expectation, every student, or we're doing a disservice to them.
Agreed.
And again, I really appreciate Linda for actually being able to put this out and not being afraid to talk about it. Because if we don't talk about it and admit that there is concerns, we're not going to overcome them.
That's correct.
Let's see. Actually, I think I might almost be done. So
You want me to jump in?
jump in if I, yeah.
Okay, all right. So let me start off as well, administration, teachers, staff, all the effort that's put in to gather the data and so that we can take a fine look where we want to go going forward. We created a strategic plan. We need data to start that conversation going forward. So I wanted to make sure that I recognize this as not the only measure we can use to identify student success. As we continue, I want to make sure that we serve the whole student, and part of that conversation is academic achievement. So today, we are specifically focusing on AZ merit that relates and correlates to our standards. So I just want to preface that by no means am I saying it's all on the teachers, it's all on the administrators or the school sites. This is definitely a district conversation that we need to work together. And so I think about it from our lens, what can the governing board do to support your efforts? So I think about our superintendent. I think about policies. So when we're in the midst of policy review, this is the time where we get input. We have one coming up, input on how those policies are going to impact student achievement. I do want to start off with kudos to our 7th grade team across the district. If you look at their stats, and we're focusing on academic achievement, year over year, whatever grade they have gotten, the previous grade, they have gone up. And if you look at one particular year, they go up almost 12%. Mm-hmm. So kudos to the 7th grade team across the district for putting all that work and effort. which leads me to the conversation is how are we identifying traits that are effective, not necessarily just meeting high proficient, minimal proficient, but the growth within those numbers. Are we including our national board certified teachers? I know we have a great initiative with our HR and creating that teacher-led initiative. And that is what's going to drive that conversation, teacher-led. Are we including teachers within our district that sit on the AZ Merit standardized testing at the state level? Are we getting outside resources that we have good partnerships with Deer Valley and our neighboring districts? How can we leverage all those partnerships to get the best of identifying effective teachers? Then I bring it back to the basics, the standards. I've been informed that this test directly aligns to our state standards. So do our teachers know the state standards? And how are we assessing that? What does that look like? Are they taking a test? I know when I take in the financial industry, I have to take a standardized test to make sure I know the content I'm going to communicate with. Do our teachers know the content they're going to communicate? Not curriculum, because curriculum is totally different than standards. I'm talking about the standards. What does that test look like? Have our high school freshman teachers ever taken the practice test? Can they pass it? We need to decide what instruments are going to tell us our teachers are ready to teach the standards that they're going to walk into. I think about test-taking strategies and the direct correlation to test anxiety. I see it in the adult world, and I see it in our children. What are we doing with the test anxiety piece? There's nothing in these outcomes or these strategic goals, efforts, addressing test anxiety. And then the only other piece I see, well, there's two other pieces. Our guidance counselors at the high school level, they're a key conversation that are not on these lineups that are part of the success of our student. They should be looking at data. Are we placing our kids in the right class? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? That part of the conversation is missing. And then I will go back to standard-based grading, our grade system. Does it reflect the accuracy of where our kids are? If more than our students are getting A's and B's, then we should hope that they would pass a standardized test that is aligned to that. School scheduling. I know I got an email about the test is in April. We're missing time, a whole month. Should we be discussing year-round school? I know Chandler Unified School District is year-round, I believe.
Or starting high school later, where kids are more academically awake.
Exactly. We really need to, this is a study session conversation. This is by no means a conversation, a full-on conversation, but.
I was ready to answer.
Okay.
Kidding, it is a study session.
Yes, it is. But our system right now is set up for agriculture. Should we be looking at year-round, starting school early, late starts? But the last thing I want to highlight, and it gives me warm fuzzies, that my fellow governing board members, we talk about inclusivity. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we have about 45% of our students that are minorities. 33% are Hispanic, I believe 11% are African American. So we could say around 45%. And they highlight the fact that we need to make sure those making decisions reflect our students. So if I ask who's on your team, I hope that you would say, we're committed to inclusivity, 45% reflect our students. We have a lot of work to do together. A lot of policies coming up. Together, we need to decide what's best for kids. Ms. Pengarelli.
I just remembered. I just wanted to ask, since we have such a high non-passing rate on the different areas, if a student fails a course, do they repeat the course? And if they fail it a second time, What, because we have a 94% graduation rate. What do we do when students don't get the material? Do we move them on?
Students must meet the high school graduation requirements. In the past, and in a lot of districts across the country, if they fail Algebra 1, they're enrolled in Algebra 1 again, typically in a year-long class, which may have been the exact same class they failed as a ninth grader. So now we've had a year in that class. Now we're taking another year in that class. Data would, across the country, would indicate that students drop out of school or begin looking for other alternatives at that grade, from grade 10 to 11. And the reason for that is that they're not keeping pace with their peers toward that graduation. So rather than do what I just described, we have to intervene much earlier, not only in the first class when they're in ninth grade, but if that isn't working, we have to have a plan B. And we tackled it to some degree by moving toward an accredited system, an intuitive system that allows students to work more flexibly, whether that's at school or at home, to accelerate that learning so we're not putting them in the box of a year-long class once again, because we've just put them now 2 years behind in mathematics. So those are some systems things that we have to figure out in traditional education settings and learn to adapt to a more flexible learning environment for students. So our efforts in blended learning models, flex classrooms, personalized learning, those are important to us as we begin to break down the one way to do school, which is typically what we experienced when we went to high school.
Yeah, final thoughts.
Madam
thank you.
President?
Oh, Mr. Savoy.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, if I could, I would just want to add a couple things to that, specifically to your question, Board Member Pangarelli. This is a high-stakes test in the sense that it's a state-mandated assessment that all high school students across Arizona take. It's not high stakes in the sense that you are required to pass this assessment to graduate from high school. The Ames assessment, if you recall some time ago, students needed to show mastery, and without passing that, they would not receive a high school diploma. So having said that, when we look at students and we look at their overall achievement, it's a much bigger picture than just the one day that this assessment is given. So it's a combination of all the work that they do in the class, the assessments that they take during the semester, and then, of course, the course assessment at the end. Also, in addition, in Peoria, in core area classes, and we've had a discussion about this through the years, that if a student doesn't receive a 70% or higher grade, they cannot move on to the next class. And typically you think of 60% or below is when you don't receive credit. But in Peoria, in core classes, it's 70% or higher. And then just my last statement on that is, as Dr. Bell referenced, there is a list of graduation requirements for our students in Peoria. The mandatory credits that they have to take in math, ELA, the sciences, the social studies. So I hope that helps answer that a little bit. This is one test on one day, and it actually, this dovetails into our next board agenda item, the idea, how do you incentivize students to do their very best on the AZ merit assignment or assessment? Because although it's not high stakes for them, it's high stakes for us as a district when we publish our labels to the community of performance indication to our community, how our schools are doing. Their letter grade system is based on AZ merit. So thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to make those comments.
So let me just ask a question. So the Peoria Unified has their own in addition to the state requirements for high school graduation, the Peoria Unified Governing Board can change high school graduation requirements.
Our requirements are slightly higher, more credits than the state requires.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so
correct.
that
Madam-
that is something that the board can consider, is let's discuss changing the high school graduation requirements.
Well, and I know this does dovetail into the next conversation, but I would express to my fellow board members that I have some conflicting feelings about these tests, because we do want students to do well, and you wonder if, we don't want high-stakes tests to be what drives the school day, in terms of we don't want to quote-unquote teach to the test. We do want our kids to do very well on these tests. But when you expressed that this is no longer a high-stakes test, the kids know that. The kids know that. And I wonder if this new model has some impact on the scores as well. So, I don't know, just thinking out loud, I need a short break.
The parents know that too, that it's not a high-stakes test. So, all right. Any additional comments, Ms. Pangarelli? Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, just thank you both again. I mean, for having the courageous dialogue. It is important. It helps us grow. We've always said we'll fail forward together. But one thing you said, Dr. Bell, and I think that we all appreciate is, and I'm going to use my words, and hopefully I'm translating it correctly, but the fact that you and team and leadership, do reflect and look in the mirror to understand what we can do better, as a district to put our students in a position to be successful versus, looking out a window and pointing a finger. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You only get 3 minutes, Dr. Davidson. Is that one for this item? Okay. All right. So I believe we all survived this conversation, but you guys did a great job sharing the information. We really do appreciate the dialogue.
Appreciate it.
Okay, moving on. (8.2) grade enhancement for proficiency. This is a policy review. This is considered a first read. A first read. No? No, this is just a conversation? Okay, so.
We do have a recommendation. This is not necessarily in policy, but it is an important consideration based upon our efforts that you just heard about.
Thank you very much. So let me just rest assured the community that this is conversation, and anything shared by the governing board members, by our community members, the conversation's not over, so please feel free to share this dialogue. They can rewatch and send us emails to our PR if they want any say on this particular policy, because it is something that Peoria is embarking on.
Okay. In light of our recent conversation, we have been working in various consortiums with our colleagues across the valley and in some cases the state. I did want to provide an update and our consideration for looking at grade enhancement for proficiency on the state assessments. So one of the things that we're discovering is that our neighboring district, Deer Valley, has moved forward in offering grade enhancement to students who meet the standards or essentially demonstrate mastery or exceeds at a highly proficient level. Their process is to, if a student on required state assessments score a proficient, their letter grade could be moved up 1 letter grade in Deer Valley. If the student has a B and scores a highly proficient on state assessments or highly exceeds, then they would achieve the A. When I found out that Mesa has a pretty identical approach, I know Chandler is in conversation as well about grade enhancement opportunities for students. Mesa essentially included in this incentive effort students not only at the high school, but students in 7th and 8th grade who may also not be as motivated as we would like. Why grade enhancement? Look how excited those students are right there. That was a joke. All right, so we want students to do a good job. We want them to take this assessment seriously. It is a difficult test. It's harder than older state assessments. There's different kinds of items on the test. And probably most importantly, it requires a level of rigor and critical thinking from students that is just not right there information like the test you and I might have taken in a high school history class. So it does require a little bit of mental sweat, if you will, when students sit down and take this assessment. We want to motivate them to do well and to take this assessment seriously because it is a high-stakes assessment. I feel that it is also very congruent to our current proficiency testing. We have by policy, and you all will take a look at this eventually, but by policy, we offer proficiency testing in Peoria Unified School District. Well, what does that mean? If a student demonstrates that he or she is ready for the next class, or in fact, ready to skip that next class, that student can take one of our developed proficiency exams. If that student scores 70% or higher on that exam, the student can move on to the next course. Probably the best example of our proficiency testing impacts 8th graders coming into 9th grade from non-unified school districts on open enrollment. As an example, we do have students who enroll, and this is an example, at Kellis High School, who are leaving Glendale Elementary School District. It is not unified, but they have gone to a high school to take Algebra 1. Because they're not enrolled in that high school, they don't get credit, but they've taken Algebra 1 at a high school. Those are kids who could take a proficiency test in Peoria Unified, demonstrate mastery or proficiency of those standards, and move on to geometry or Algebra 2. We know that we want to focus attention to the state standards. I think that came up tonight in a variety of ways in terms of what our efforts must entail. By providing grade enhancement on a state test that assesses our required Arizona standards, we do want to recognize that and reward students who score proficient. So by asking students to take the test more seriously, in my judgment, is not to teach to the test. What we must have our teachers do is teach to the required standards at the appropriate level of rigor, because that will get them ready for the aligned state assessment. The AIMS science test is a little bit of a moving target for us. We are in Arizona in the midst of changing our science standards. We thought that would be accomplished last year. It was not. We're going into this school year for the new science standards to be revised. That will also require some level of changes in terms of grade level and standard expectations that we will be working on. But again, we recognize that science is critical to the success of their future, and want to include that as a part of our grade enhancement program. A minute ago, I talked about more flexible opportunities for kids to show mastery. I talked a little bit about our summer school opportunities, more opportunities than just a semester or a year-long course that's available to kids, opportunities for kids to accelerate through their learning and earn credit with more flexible opportunities to demonstrate mastery. So again, just like what we're working on in terms of changing some of what we know as school, we also want to look at this state assessment and mastery on it or proficiency on it as a more flexible opportunity for kids to earn or gain credit or grade enhancement in this case. I want to recognize this and or announce this to our board in that neither district nor would we, and the ones that we've studied, and there's not a conversation in any other district that these tests or poor student performance on them would be used to penalize the student. So again, this is only used at this point. It would be used in our district and is being used in other districts as a motivator, as a positive indicator for students to demonstrate mastery, and we would not lower the grades on one test associated with students being unable to meet proficiency. Mike's going to talk a little bit about an impact study. Our superintendent did ask, well, how many kids could this possibly impact if we did implement this particular approach?
Madam President, members of the governing board, we were asked to take a look, and anytime you want to change a practice, particularly a grading practice, you want to know who's going to be impacted. So we chose 1,500 students, 4 different schools, 7th grade, 4 different schools, 8th grade, took a look and compared basically their score on the proficient, minimally proficient, highly proficient, based compared to their grade. So if they got a grade of A, what was their test taken in that grade level? This was from last year, 2017, 2008 school year. 8% of the kids would meet the criteria for grade improvement. In other words, we would have, and in particular, you break them down, 2% would get the highly proficient and move to an A, 6% would be proficient and be able to move to a B. Now, not all the kids were A's or were B's that moved up. We did have some students who were C's who got highly proficient who would only be able to go the one grade level up to a B, but we did have some of those that were able to move up. I even had one that in a high school that got an F in the class and got a highly proficient on the test as we went through the process, probably the second time through the class. In the high schools, we did the same thing with Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, ELA 9, ELA 10, ELA 11. We looked at multiple schools, multiple classes, 5,480 kids. You can see 10% there would meet the criteria for grade improvement, 4% for highly proficient, 6% for proficient. And of those, we started to look at with the greater impact on math and language arts. Okay? I skipped those 2 little points there because what we really started talking about was what is it and who is it we're going to be able to attract to really improve if we want to motivate the students. And so we looked, and you see there 3% of the elementary kids and 4% of the high school kids are within 10 scale score points of having either a proficient score or a highly proficient score. In other words, and 10 scale score points, by the way, is 2 questions. So if a student were to just try on 2 more questions or get 2 more questions correct, they would then increase those percentages from 8% to 11% in the high school, in the elementary schools, and from 4% to 14% in the high schools. And again, we would be able to get those kids to maybe try those 2 extra questions, maybe not just skip out at the last one. I don't want to do this. I'm going to guess on the last 3 because I'm tired. Whatever the case may be, we may be able to capture a few more of those who will move forward with 2 additional questions is all they need to move up and be part of that process. Okay.
Mr. Sandoval.
Mr. Mosk, a quick question for you on the impact study. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the 8% would meet the criteria, obviously without the incentive, right?
Correct.
And I agree, our goal is to certainly, move up those 3% that are in that space. That said, as we take a look at this enhancement, have we spoken to students to understand if this is something that would drive them, that would inspire them and move them to do better? on the test?
We have not. We have had multiple conversations with our administrators. This isn't the first even school year that this conversation has come up. What we do hear, however, from teachers, particularly as students get older, is they're not taking it seriously. They're just not motivated. And so I think this approach is designed to increase student interest and motivation and effort, if you will. Again, as I mentioned before, it's not an easy assessment, and so that mental sweat and sticking with it until the end is kind of the approach that some of the districts are considering and taking and moving forward. We have not talked with kids. I could certainly do that should we decide to move forward.
Sandoval, I just wanted to say thank you. That's a very valid and great point, because if we're going to assume that they were not motivated and we haven't spoken to them, then we don't know if they were not motivated. So we're making assumptions as leaders that they were not motivated. So to get down to what is the root cause, I think it's important to include their voice in this conversation.
Yeah, agreed. And as we, take a look at, integrating new programs, et cetera, we always want to understand, what our outcome, what that outcome is that we're shooting for, right? And you just brought up two items, motivation and to do better on the test. Are those the two factors that would, as we look at this, and to understand whether or not it's successful, right? Are those, really kind of the two major variables that we'll be looking at, motivation and doing better on the test? I think, it's probably an obvious answer, right?
Well, I think that's part of it. In looking at our data and having discussions about where we are at this point, for me, the other message is that we are required to teach the state standards to the level of mastery. And our data might indicate that we need to do a much better job in doing that.
Yeah.
And if this is the assessment, similar to what we might call internally our own proficiency exam, if the state has a proficiency exam, might we want to say, like the student that isn't doing very well in our classroom but is able to show proficiency, high proficiency on the state standards on the state exam. So for me, the message is also about getting back to what we know we need to do for Arizona students, for our Peoria students, and focus on the state standards as adopted by our state.
Yeah, and for me, again, and I agree, I'm a little torn as well on this, but and Mrs. Connect brought it up earlier. I think one of my, I guess major heartburns here is when we take a look at, teaching to a test, right? And I know you brought up, really we're going to make sure that our teachers understand and focus on teaching to the standard, right? But my reservation is, if, the classroom, begins to, focus on teaching to a test, does it potentially take us away from all those other dynamics that, Mr. Moss mentioned when he was, speaking to the data, that we need to understand those other learning barriers, right? That we absolutely need to understand to uplift, all of our students.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Savoy, you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. A couple things. Number one, received a note from Ms. Airy. Just wanted you to know that we do meet with the Superintendent's Student Advisory Council pretty much every other month through the year. These are the high school student body presidents. It is agendized to speak with them in September. So we will have that conversation to Mr. Sandoval and Madam President's point. The other thing I just want to clarify for our audience on this agenda item, because we were talking about policy at the beginning, this is not a policy item. If you recall, when the board members were speaking some months ago at the end of one meeting, there was an inquiry about grade enhancement through the AZ merit process. And so as a leadership team, we began to investigate that. And we collected this information that we're presenting to you this evening. And as a result of that work, we as a leadership group are making a recommendation this evening that there'd be consideration and approval of allowing us to implement that practice. Now, this is totally up to the governing board, but so it does come before you as a voting item. I know there is public input from the community that would like to speak this evening as well. And so we'll follow the direction of the board, but I just want you to know that this is an item that we brought forward for your consideration, whether to allow us to implement this practice or not. Thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Savoy. Restroom break? Okay. And we're going to continue. Anything else? Okay, no more slides. I have all slides over here printed. Perfect, thank you.
I think you already mentioned that we would be, based upon that work, making the recommendation to move forward with grade enhancement for the AZ merit or state mandated test.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that, Mr. Savoy, you are correct. It was first and seconded to bring back as a discussion in front of the governing board, and here we are. So we'll continue with the discussion. Ms. Connect, do you want to add anything?
I do, thank you. I'll tell you, my first instinct when the topic came up was that if we put too much weight on this test at the end of a course, that it might minimize some of the other coursework. And unfortunately, we don't have the ability, we don't regularly assess or measure in numbers things like follow-through and reliability and work ethic and even attendance, that I think are skills that kids learn in school that carries them far into their future, into their business and civic lives. So at first I was thinking that that this would minimize some of those other factors that happen every day in our classrooms. Another point that I would add to grade enhancement, though, that affected our family, is the difference between a B and a C in a high school career can mean thousands of dollars to a family. Thousands. And so, absolutely, we want to make sure that the kids are learning the content, but we shouldn't take that grade lightly, because that means a lot to some families, to many families, in fact. So we need to give kids every opportunity to be successful and get the GPA that they deserve, and to help them achieve that as best they can. The other thing I wanted to say, if I can read my chicken scratch here. I can't read my chicken scratch here. I'm going to have to come back to that. It will come right back to me. You know it will.
Yes, and that's okay, because I also have 3 public speakers. Would we like to have them proceed? Okay. So we're going to have 3 public speakers, and then we'll continue the conversation with the governing board. So I do apologize for that.
I have it, but I'll wait now.
Okay. We'll go ahead and start with Ms. Jean McGrath.
President Martinez, board members, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I'm Jean McGrath. I sit on the board of the Maricopa County Community College District. We wring our hands constantly over the state of K-12 education here, because our entering freshmen, the ones who want to take a full course study, and are hoping to get a degree, have to pass an entrance exam. We give this exam in English, writing, and mathematics, and I'm sad to say that 60 to 70% of those people cannot pass this exam. The state of K-12 and education in Arizona is in very, very bad shape. Peoria used to be the very best district in the state of Arizona. I think that was mainly due to the fact that you taught every student to read using the phonics method, not just phonics, but the Spalding phonics method. You had a reading instructor here, specialist Dr. Mary North, and she produced students that excelled in everything, because if you don't learn to read, you can't learn anything else. And Mary North produced students who excelled at reading, and believe me, Peoria ranked very, very high. If this passes, your district will be judged as a district of very poor quality. You will be judged that you cheat, because that's what this is. It is giving grades to students who did not earn them, who do not deserve them. I sit on the scholarship committee of two different organizations that I belong to, and we're going to be looking long and hard at the grade point average of Peoria graduates. That's one of the things that we grade very highly upon in awarding these scholarships. And we won't be able, if you pass this, to ascertain that Peoria's graduates are truly deserving of the grade point average that they bring in. And it's unbelievable that you're even considering this. I strongly urge you to revert to Dr. Mary North's method of teaching phonics to every kindergarten primary student. It's amazing what it does. Dr. Carol Peck in the Alhambra district had every teacher in her kindergarten through 8th grade class able to teach phonics. She had the highest percentage of non-English speaking students in the entire state. And when they had students coming in the upper grades, that instructor had to be able to teach them to read, and he had to teach them to read with the one method that works for every student. Maybe not every student. There are some people that have difficulties, but and her students outscored the students in all of the tests given, and they outscored everybody in a regular public school. The only students they didn't outscore were those very high achieving charter schools. And I strongly urge you, teach your students to read properly and give up this idiocy of grade enhancement. It does nothing for the student, and it does nothing for the colleges that are looking to admit them. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Guthridge.
President Martinez, members of the governing board, Mr. Savoy. I want to follow up on something that Mrs. Kinect mentioned, and that was the significant difference between a C and a B, okay? Our parents told us to study hard when we were kids because they knew that better grades were the key to our future, okay? From college admissions, as Ms. McGrath just pointed out, and scholarships to starting salaries with employers, if you've got better grades, you have a distinct and clear advantage over other students, okay? So those students whose GPAs would be bumped up by this proposal will automatically receive a benefit from this district, an advantage over other students who don't have their grades bumped up by this policy. I looked at the math scores for PUSD high schools last night, and I just kind of piled them all together to see how our kids did and who would benefit from the grade inflation proposal. The numbers indicate, if you look at all of them together, and I'm going to be really harsh here, guys, 70% of the students receiving the advantages of grade inflation would be white, and only 30% would be Hispanic, okay? Speaking of just the math scores, when you consider the entire student body in PUSD, high school student body, this policy would give 34% of our white students this clear advantage into their futures, as far into their future as you can go, while 85% of our Hispanic students would be denied the same advantage. I would like to know how you can consider such a discriminatory policy in this district. Those kids deserve better than what this proposal would deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna Southand.
Evening, President Martinez and board. I just learned about this afternoon, so I'm really kind of came to learn what this was about. and I'm nervous, I'm sorry. I had a daughter graduate from Peoria High School, and I have a grandson that's in the high school system now. We came here to Peoria because it was a good school district. So my grandson, he's a straight A student, he works hard. I asked him about this. I said, what happens if these grades get bumped up? And he goes, what happens to my GPA? He goes, my ranking will drop because others are higher because of this grade enhancement. And that's not fair to somebody who sits there and really works hard. When he's sitting at that 91, 92%, he buckles down hard because he doesn't know what his final essays or tests will be. He makes sure he's not going to fall down into that B category because you are right. It is going to make a difference. He wants to maintain those straight A's, but he wants to earn them, not be given them. So if we do have an A student and he gets a high proficiency on the test, what is his enhancement? What is his motivation? His motivation comes from within. It comes from wanting to do the best he can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pangarelli? Oh, wait, I apologize. One more. Mr. Jim Kallenbach. Thank you.
Good evening, President Ceja Martinez, Mr. Savoy, board members. As one of the few teachers in the room right now, and the only person in the room who was a participant in the Ames science test writing process many, many years ago, I can tell you that the test was written to the standards. We worked very hard over 3 years to write that, but we only wrote 1 copy instead of Ames English and Ames Math, where there were 5 copies so kids could retake it and retake it and retake it as a graduation requirement. The state didn't have the money for it, so we wrote 1 copy of the test, and we still give it to you. We still give it to our students. As a teacher who gets assigned by my administration to proctor tests like this on a regular basis, I've watched students not care. Large scores of them, 24 students in a room, and 10 will just bubble, 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 put their head down, and they don't care because it doesn't matter to them. This test only matters to our profession. It only matters to A to F grades. It only matters to what the district looks like. It does not matter to the students. Not all of the students, right? The top 10%, the ones competing for the scholarships, are working hard. And so, but in Mr. Moss's data, their grades aren't going to change. Whose grades are going to change? The kids in the middle, right? They're not competing, trying to outcompete other kids for scholarships. They might qualify for a lumberjack scholarship if they C gets to be a B, right? But they're not out competing people for scholarships. What we're just talking about is giving an incentive to students to, hey, care about this. It might help you. They don't know what their grade's going to be, right? But the kid who, instead of putting his head down, he gives it a try. Instead of she just wants to quit, she gives it a try. She's not the kid that's competing with other kids for scholarships. They're already working hard. They're already trying their best on the test. We're talking about the middle kids. We're not talking about the kids that are going to go to community college and take that assessment, and that assessment should stand by itself, and it is sad that we have students that can't do that. Part of that is because they don't practice taking tests well, right? There's no incentive for them to work hard taking Ames or ACT or the ASVAB or any of the other things our awesome district gives students an opportunity because they don't care, it doesn't matter to them. And then all of a sudden they go to the community college and 60% don't make it. But that's not because we didn't teach them, it's because they didn't have a reason to care. Here's a little tiny nugget. Just try. That's all we're asking. That's as a teacher, all I want is some incentive from those students in the bottom, not the top ones taking scholarships from other people, but just that middle bunch. Give it a try. Just here's an incentive to try. That's all we're asking. Can you give our students an incentive to try? Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have one more, Dr. Peter Pangarelli.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Saya Martinez, members of the board, Mr. Savoy. It's an honor to speak to you. I actually want to start by commenting and agreeing with Mrs. Connick's point with regard to grades involving thousands of dollars. That is, if a student goes from a C to a B or a B to an A, that it has a tremendous amount of impact in terms of post-secondary education scholarships. And given the expense involved in grants and loans and family expenditures, this is a very significant thing. My point that I want to make is that I do agree that it perhaps is a small portion of students, as Mr. Moss says. My concern as a post-secondary educator is that if you bump certain students up, and now they are entitled to these scholarships, maybe a portion of a scholarship, and they go to Grand Canyon or ASU, and the family lays out another $10,000 or $20,000, if they are not prepared, and if they take the single exam, and for some reason they do well on it, and they are not prepared through the persistence and constant learning activities in a semester-long course or a year-long course, they will fail. The dropout rate for freshmen is quite high. And I don't want to see a policy. I understand both sides of the argument, but I don't want to see a policy which inflates or enhances a grade, because colleges use those grades to, or college advisors, to put those students into higher, into harder and more difficult courses, and there's the potential for them to fall out. So, and then what happens is students come running home. We've seen it throughout our district where, you know, kids come home, they failed out of the first year. And I would only say in my 42 seconds left, in teaching freshman pre-med biology and even chemistry, after the first couple assessments, Dr. Pingarelli, I don't understand. I got all A's in high school. Why am I doing so bad? Why can't I succeed here? Because it is a different level, and I think that is the point I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any more green slips. So, Ms. Pingarelli, wait, we have one more. Ms. Janogino.
Good evening, President Pingarelli, members of the board, Mr. Savoy. All I really wanted to add to this conversation is that I've worked on 2 years I worked on Ames ELA and 5 years on AZ Merit ELA. So sometimes I think we think that the Peoria of the past, where we were judged by Ames, is very different than the Peoria of the present, where we were judged by AZ Merit. And having seen and worked on both tests, I can tell you that you cannot really compare the two. Ames was aligned to our old performance objective standards, and AZ Merit is aligned to the standards that we have now, and formerly, you know, what was Common Core, then renamed. And they are significantly different in the level of rigor, significantly different in the expectation for students' depth of knowledge in terms of reading. So although the numbers look significantly lower, although the numbers look significantly different, we are not comparing two same tests. They're extremely different in what they tested for and the level at which they tested for. So I'm not altogether discouraged, even though, I mean, it could be better. But we cannot compare the percentages we see with AZ Merit with the same percentages we had with Ames. Now, is that all the difference? No, of course not. You know, there are lots of differences. We have demographic differences. We have all kinds of other outside forces that also impact education. But as far as comparing the two assessments, they are not the same. And that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll continue with the conversation. Ms. Pingarelli?
Well, when I first looked at this, and I've listened, I've talked to people on both sides. I am not a proponent of grade enhancement, or I would call inflation. And I do agree with Mrs. Connect in terms of the dollar amount of scholarships. But I've witnessed too many kids, young adults, flunking out and coming home and trying to reassess. I don't think that one data point is better than a whole school year or a semester of data points. And Mr. Savoy, you had mentioned that, and I know administration agrees with the grade enhancement and would like the board to go through with it. By doing that, if a student scores better and we give them motivation to score better, it affects our grading for our schools, A, B, or C. So is it a motivation for the district to try to get a better rating on the school by motivating the students?
Madam President, Mrs. Pangarelli, that's accurate. I don't believe that was the motivating factor, but it certainly is a piece to that. There's certainly conversation that the rigor of the AZ merit test is significant. The depth of knowledge needed to process and solve the questions that are asked in the field of ELA and mathematics are complex. Many of them are multi-step problems. And so the discussion really centered on the idea that if a student can pass that test with proficiency or high proficiency, they are certainly demonstrating mastery of performance of the expectation by meeting the standards that are prescribed by the Arizona Department of Education. And so that was really where the conversation centered. Again, we responded to the board's inquiry about this, researched it, brought it back. But that's really where the conversation centered, because there's always that inverse argument, right? There's the idea of the student who doesn't do well in the class, yet he's able and competent enough to highly perform on a very difficult test. It's a question that was pondered.
So that begs the question that is in my head. Why are we looking at the curriculum and instruction in a course as separate from a test that assesses the standards on which the course was built? Why are they two separate things? If the kids are supposed to learn standards that are tested at the end, isn't the entire coursework centered around learning that? And if that is the case, I don't think this should be an issue with sides. This should be, how do we make our kids successful? How do we help them learn skills that are going to take them forward? How are we going to help them learn content that is going to make them successful in school, in higher education? And then how do we help them to do well on a test? Couldn't we make that AZ merit test the end of course assessment? Why do they have to be two separate things?
I'm going to refer that to Dr. Bell, because that's a good question.
We've actually had that discussion.
And let me just say, because if the coursework doesn't support that test, what's it about? It should be about alignment, just like our coursework and that test should align with what kids need to know when they're in junior college or at the university. This seems to be an alignment issue to me.
I agree. One of the things that we've had the discussion about was, in all actuality, if these are the standards, this is the end game test.
Make it worth
that-
25% of the grade or 20% or something, so that it's all connected. The worst thing we can do to our students is waste their time. That's the worst thing. It's the worst thing we can do to adults. So everything should be working towards not just a test, but how is the information you're gaining today going to serve you in your future life? And that test should be just a hurdle. And by golly, it shouldn't be that difficult if the coursework that the students have been asked to do and have done with one of your favorite words, fidelity. Tests should go easy, and so should getting into college.
So one of the things that we talked about is that we would love to have it as a required end-of-course exam, taking the place of our internal. It's the delay in getting the results back that interrupt that process in terms of using it in that manner. So there are what districts are doing in lieu of that, because I think most of us that are moving in this direction have researched it and are talking about it, or districts that have moved forward, is recognizing that, yeah, that's probably the way it should be. But while we want to count it as the end-of-course assessment, there's too much delay for high school students in terms of counting it as such.
Ugh. I'm sorry, this isn't about you. This is 2018. How long does it take to run them through and get them on the computer and back, right?
Right.
So let's be really creative about it. If they're filling out the bubbles on the AZ Merit, let's have, what do they call that, carbon paper, and fill out another one at the same time that our teachers can grade while we're waiting on the state to send back the data.
And
I
we
mean-
can certainly talk to the state about that.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's not about me.
Right, it's not about you. I mean, you're doing a great job, our teachers are doing a great job. I think in most cases, our kids are working really hard. Maybe they're not working as hard on the test as they should be. But there just seems that there's so many smart people in this room and in our schools that this shouldn't be, I mean, it's not and or. It's not you do good,
We would
you
agree
do well.
with that.
Yeah.
We would totally agree with that. We were, in exploring this and bringing it back to you, we were looking at a way that would really promote student motivation on the assessment. And when we started crunching the numbers and did our impact study, it also had to do with students who repeat a class, or students who were not successful in the class, but yet can demonstrate proficiency. So this opportunity was more about providing, again, more flexible options for students to demonstrate proficiency of the state standards.
I think one thing that came from the conversation and from the people that spoke is it's got to count, right? It's got to count for something, or else the kids won't perform, we think. But it doesn't have to, in my mind, it doesn't have to be separate from the coursework. It shouldn't be.
Jump in. I appreciate, I did bring this up. I hear everybody's voices, and I do appreciate that. We are truly in a conundrum because teachers and educators voice that we don't have enough money or resources to support our kids, yet we have a test that is directly related to income we receive to serve our kids. And if our kids don't perform, then we don't get any money to help them. So we're in a vicious cycle, and we don't want to focus all this attention on a standardized test, because that's not what we're serving. That's not the way Peoria Unified does things. However, great points brought up. We send students to community colleges that can't pass an entrance exam. That's a problem. We have GPAs that are already weighted behind closed doors. How do we know this? Because teachers give extra credit. And what type of extra credit do they give? For bringing in canned foods. for turning in their work early, for all kinds of things, for showing up to meet the teacher night. So as long as our practices are not in paper, it's okay to give a weighted grade, as long it's not in black and white. So our students leave our district with weighted GPAs, and it's okay to give them those scholarships because we don't see it. But now that we're talking about giving students the ability, the atypical student, another opportunity to show, okay, I could not work well in the environment of a classroom, but here's one more shot for you to take a test to prove that you have mastered these standards. We're not going to serve them. I think we need to consider that. Now, I hear it's all about the money. We have kids who have a B that have worked hard, but then we have to ask ourselves in the Peoria School District, what's our philosophy on grading? Are we assessing the standards that our kids should be leaving with? Are we assessing the behavior because they're hard workers, because they are good citizens to our community? Those are two different competencies we should be assessing. Standards, behaviors. Both of them have positive outcomes. And to Ms. Connect's point, we shouldn't discount either one of them. We need to know confidently that we're going to send our kids that have mastered basic K-3 reading. We need to know confidently that our students have mastered math so that when they enter their 401k plan, they know how to add contributions, compounding. And we can probably say most of the industry workers have to take some kind of assessment. If you want to be a CDL driver, you have to take a standardized test. If you want to be a teacher, you have to take a standardized test. If you want to be a finance major, a CPA, a superintendent, you have to take a standardized test. So don't discount, as educators, the idea of a standardized test because we live that every day. And if you pass that test, it opens more doors. And that's what we need to share our children, tell our students, that if you are able to pass a test, it will open more doors. So we as a district need to decide, what is our grading philosophy? Are we assessing behaviors and we're going to reward you? Or are we going to assess the standards that is tied to money so that we can get more resources for our students and our teachers? Because the better they do, the more money we'll get. And that means the more state will have to give to us. And that's a problem. Or is it? I brought this up because I've heard parents in the Peoria United Parent Council and other organizations say, I don't even send my kids to school on those days. Why? Because they don't need it to graduate. Yet we're being judged by our communities that we have terrible public school systems. We definitely have a problem. And how are we going to fix it? So this is definitely a discussion we need to have. And it's money is tied to it on all rounds, from the state level, from student scholarships. But kids' grades are already enhanced.
So, Dr. Bell, Mr. Moss, thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, you look, as a district, as an education institution, if you will, we have a grand obligation to ensure that every student that walks through our doors is put in a position to be successful throughout college, career in life, or, higher education, career in life. That said, I know we're going to have a further discussion, study session around the data that we went over. But for me, I'd like to really be thoughtful and take a deep dive into a solution that's more enduring, something that is lasting. I've always said it, all of our teachers and staff or district, they define and build the character of a community, state, and nation. We need to uphold that and, and certainly instill solutions that are impacting and that are long-term. Thank you.
I just want to, before we end this conversation, I don't want to leave a bad taste in anybody's mouth. We know that many of our kids are earning great scholarships based on their achievements. And My daughter and both my daughters are graduates, and their friend groups are going on to college and getting great jobs. So I think it's really important that while, of course, there are kids that are affected by this, and we want to do better for every kid, that we do excellent work here in the school district, and that's because of outstanding educators at all levels, and we thank them for their efforts.
I do have one more speaker who just, Miss Jen Wirt. Thank you for your email.
You're welcome. Thank you for responding so quickly. Thank you for letting me speak with you guys today. I wanted to I was watching from home, had to zip over here really quick. I feel really passionately about this. I'm an 18-year veteran in our district. I am a math teacher for all 18 of those years from 6th through 12th grade. So I've seen this test in person. I've seen my kids react to it. I feel like I know a little bit about it. I do think there is some authenticity to the idea of motivating our students and giving them some kind of a benefit for their hard work on a test. I am personally quite concerned about the idea of a straight letter improvement on an overall grade after a semester or a year's worth of work. I did a little calculation as a math teacher. If a student began their course assessment in my class with a 70%, it would be mathematically impossible for them to raise that grade to an 80%. They would have to earn 120% on the test. We're saying that we will allow a student to earn a 70% in class and take a single test and earn what is essentially a 120% gain. So we have to think about that. It's not a 10% raise in grade. It's a 120% gain. And that's just not fair to those kids who have been putting in the work and doing all those things that we teach our kids are incredibly important for their lives. We want you to pay attention. We want you to acknowledge deadlines. We want you to use your time in class effectively. We want you to speak appropriately with your peers. And when we take all of that away and say this one day has so much value, we really take away a lot of what we're doing as educators in the classroom. So I do believe there's value in giving some sort of a motivator for kids. But if it's an end-of-course assessment, it should be used as an end-of-course assessment. It should not be used as anything else. It's not a bonus. It's not a treat. It's work, and we need to treat it like work. And if you're not doing the daily work, you shouldn't get extra credit.
True, but just to clarify what you're meaning, could an end-of-course assessment could still be a grade in the grade book?
Absolutely, the end-of-course assessment is. And in fact, the AZ merit scores do come out before grades close. As a high school teacher, we receive them sometimes close, sometimes only 24 hours before we have to submit our grades. But we always have our AZ merit scores before our grades are required to be posted.
Well, there you
so
go.
it
Good.
absolutely could be used as a course assessment replacement.
Great proposal.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Pingarelli, anything else to add?
Well, I know this is a discussion / potential action item. I just want the board to be conscious that Mrs. Doan is not here to weigh in on such an important topic.
Yes, I appreciate that. Ms. Doan did send us a message that she would request that we table it for further discussion. Okay, so with that being said, I do appreciate everybody's dialogue, honesty, candid opinions. Hopefully everybody in the community is listening, even our fellow educators, to weigh in on something we do need to consider. What is Peoria's philosophy, and how do we make sure we are assessing the standards so that our kids are meeting their full potential? So thank you, everybody. And at this point, we don't need a vote because it's just an item, correct? Okay, so just a table. So I move that we table the 8.2 AZ merit grade enhancement for further discussion.
I will second.
We have a motion by myself and a second by Ms. Pingarelli to table the item for future discussion. Motion passes 4-0, one absent. We are moving on to policies. Ms. Myers, first reads.
Well, good evening. President Ceja Martinez, members of the Governing Board, Mr. Savoy, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide the next set of policy that's part of our policy update. And we're going to start this evening with policy BCB. And this policy is the result of a policy advisory number 625 related to board member conflict of interest. And specifically, the new language in red is an addition to the policy and exhibit to clarify conflict of interest and to more closely reflect the language applicable to employees, which was released in policy advisory number 621, which we'll also cover in just a few policy agenda items. But basically, in February of 2018, ASBA put out policy advisory number 603, which added language to GBE AAE, staff conflict of interest, updating this exhibit to more closely follow the conflict of interest disclosure memorandum that's in the Attorney General Arizona Agency Handbook. And in the red, what it's basically doing is defining more closely what refrain means. Refrain from participating in any manner means more than just refraining from making a final decision, but rather from participating at any point in that decision-making process. And so that is the addition under the policy advisory for our first policy, BCB.
Ms. Connect, any discussion? Ms. Pangarelli? Mr. Sandoval? I do. So in this list, we also have staff conflict of interest. It's one of the, we'll get to it in just a moment, but reading that verbiage, they specifically highlight that may require annual employee training. I would say that the governing board members should be upheld to that same measure, and we should include may be required to take annual training for conflict of interest. I think it's in best practice that we as an organization maintain high ethics, and I would like to see that implemented and added to this conflict of interest, that we should be taking training on an annual basis as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Ceja Martinez. The language that we're bringing forward this evening is specific to ASBA's advisories. As we look at then modifying from a Peoria perspective with our policy audit, we could certainly consider that additional language.
Mrs. Ceja Martinez, what about the idea, just an alternative idea, I think training is a good idea, as part of the onboarding process, so that, let's say if someone is on for 12 years, that they didn't have to go through the training 12 years in a row.
I like that concept. I think about the securities industry. We take it annually. We're upheld to that. I know that there's high stakes with influencing stocks and businesses, but I believe we're dealing with public funds and something to consider maybe biannually.
We do sign the form every year.
Correct.
So, and it's outlined there, the statutes, so.
Correct.
I'm going off. You guys can do whatever you want.
Right. But I think going forward, we should be also upheld to the same standard as our employees, and we're making a recommendation to go in that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Sandoval, anything else?
No, I agree. And Ms. Myers, I mean, as you stated, I mean, today we're going over ASBA, making sure that we're in alignment there. We will have the opportunity, though, throughout our many policies, procedures to make some amendments to those as a board.
Mr. Sandoval, that is correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's it for this one. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So we'll move along to our next policy, which is DICA budget. Waiting for that agenda to move along and open. Thank you. So this advisory is unique because the first advisory for this policy section created a new policy. So policy DICA is new, and in fact, since it's been created, there has been one advisory issued as well, and that is policy 629 related to budget format and advisory. So both the new policy and the advisory reflect current statutory language in Arizona Revised Statute 15903, which requires the school district budget format to include a variety of information to prominently display on the district's website specific information pertaining to salaries and dollars spent in the classroom. So that's in addition to our budget form, as well as requirements to information that we include on our website. And specifically, the district shall prominently post on its website homepage a copy of profile pages that are part of our budget process. That includes a link to the Dollars in the Classroom report that's published by the Auditor General's office each year, as well as certain rather additional categorical information that can include pupil-teacher ratios and pupil-staff ratios for special education, full-time equivalent certified employees, the average salary of teachers employed by the district for the current year, as well as the average salary for teachers from the prior year, the dollar increase in average salary between the 2 years, as well as the percentage increase between those years. And we do have that information on our website on our budget page, and we're in the process of moving that to our front page as well as our budget page. That completes that particular policy advisory. Are there any questions from the board?
Ms. Pingerelli? Ms. Connect, I see you shaking your head. Mr. Sandoval? And nothing for me as well.
Thank you. So we'll move along to the next policy, which is audits and financial monitoring, and I'm always interested to see why that's policy DIE.
What's the little copyright thing behind it that's crossed out? What was that? RD?
Mrs. Connect, thank you. That shows if it's a copyrighted policy or if it's not copyrighted, meaning there's something unique for Peoria to the policy.
But what does RD mean? I'm just curious.
It's a copy edit notation, and I apologize, I'm not remembering the exact definition. It means remove.
Oh, gotcha.
So policy DIE has 3 advisories related to audits and financial monitoring. The first is there's an addition to policy that references the Office of Management and Budget Compliance supplement of June 2016, and in a nutshell, that's bringing in a reference related to federal funding and single audits and uniform grant guidance. And then the second advisory is advisory number 617, which is reflecting changes in Arizona Revised Statute 41-1279.03 to require each school district to prominently post on its website homepage a copy of its profile pages that displays the percentage of every dollar spent in the classroom by the school district from the most recent status report issued by the Auditor General. So basically, as part of our audit, they will now test that we're following the budgetary requirement. And Policy Advisory 630, which is a reflection of House Bill 2663, added language to Arizona Revised Statute 15213 regarding audit firm rotations and audit firm consulting fees. So the language is noted in red, and you'll see the reference to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, as well as statutory limitations now for school districts on how many years they can be with the same audit firm. Effective August 3rd, 2018, moving forward, you can only have the same audit firm for 3 years, and then you would need to go out and issue an RFP and have a procurement solicitation to look at hiring a different audit firm. That's now in statute, as well as the prohibition on audit firms providing consulting services to their audit clients. I can share here in the Peoria Unified School District, we have Clifton Larson Allen as our audit firm, and we do not use them for ongoing consulting. We use Heinfeld and Meach as our consulting firm. And that also includes, with the red changed language, a final additional paragraph referencing the posting on the home page website, the dollars in the classroom information, or a link to the actual Auditor General's dollars in the classroom report.
Any comments by my fellow governing board members? Nope, we're good.
Well, thank you. So we'll move along then to policy DJ, which is purchasing. which is a much better policy than DIE, right? So in policy DJ, purchasing, there are 2 advisories. I'll make sure I've got that up for everyone to refer to. Yes. So there are 2 policies here that we're addressing this evening, or I should say policy advisories. Policy Advisory 618 and Policy Advisory number 631. And these 2 advisories add substantial additional language from Arizona Revised Statute 15213 pertaining to purchasing, supervision of financial transactions, personal gifts and benefits and penalties, as well as reprisal against an employee for the disclosure of public information if they're making a notification of a misuse of funds or an inappropriate activity within a district. So that's a lot of information, and you'll see there's quite a bit of red text. And what that text is basically highlighting that there has always been a prohibition on gifts to district employees, but now that's being further detailed, and it has specific penalties, dollar penalty, or actually misdemeanor and felony level penalties. And so the language starts out with a person who supervises or participates in contracts, purchases, payments, claims, or other financial transactions, or a person who supervises or participates in the planning, recommending, selecting, or contracting for materials, services, goods, construction, or construction services of a school district or school purchasing cooperative could face a penalty ranging from a Class 1 misdemeanor to a Class 6 felony if a gift or benefit is received beyond a nominal value. And that description of nominal value is also in the new language. And a gift or benefit does not include food or beverage or expenses or sponsorships related to a special event or function related to individuals identified in this policy, nor does it include an item of nominal value, such as a greeting card, T-shirt, mug, or pen. Those types of nominal gifts, if you will, are permitted, where it's clearly defining gift or benefit is within certain dollar amount thresholds. Up to $300 is not prohibited. That's a misdemeanor, and 300 and above is a felony. And it's interesting because this new language attaches to district employees as well as the vendor. So if there is a gift or a benefit that's offered to a public school district employee, that same penalty attaches to the vendor or the third party offering that gift. So that language is now in policy, or the proposed policy modification. And the final additional language is a district employee who has control over personnel actions may not take reprisal against a district employee for that employee's disclosure of information that is a matter of public concern, including a violation of district policy or laws, regulations, etc., as published by the governing board. And I must note that there is a typo. It should not say or, it's for in that red text. Yeah. And that concludes the changes for policy section DJ.
Ms. Myers, excuse me, this policy and the ones, the couple just prior to that too, are fresh changes from the 2018 legislative session. And I recognize that in some cases it's going to create a lot of work, like moving things onto the front page that was already on page 3. You have to duplicate it and all that. Anyway, I'm tempted to editorialize, and I won't. But just this one in particular, this procurement one, do you know, does it apply to charter schools and private schools too, or just to districts?
President Ceja Martinez, Mrs. Connect, thank you for that question. I will need to confirm if it applies to charter schools, and I can certainly provide that information to the governing board in a Friday report.
Okay, I'm just curious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more comments? We're good.
Thank you. Then we'll move along to the next agenda item, which is for policy DJE, which is also purchasing. This policy has 2 advisories, policy advisory number 570, Policy DGE has been modified in response to recent district audit questions pertaining to compliance and contracting with small and minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms. The second policy advisory modifies language to include a paragraph with the words public inspection and rationale for awarding a contract. So you can see the red new language that's part of the advisory. And it really has two lenses. The first is that the superintendent of the district will ensure that all aspects of bidding and purchasing conform to federal and state laws, rules, and regulations, especially related to compliance with including contracting with small and minority businesses, women's businesses, enterprises, and labor surplus area firms. And then further down, there's additional text that's in red that highlights that the governing board shall make available for public inspection all information, all bids, proposals, and qualifications submitted, and all findings and other information considered in determining whose bid conforms to the district's invitation for bids. And we will also make the rationale for awarding a contract publicly available. And those are the two changes for this policy section.
Any comments from the governing board? We're good.
Thank you. Then we'll move along to policy DKA, payroll, the next agenda item. And this policy advisory really was quite simple. It did two things. It updated language to reflect current statutory requirements for paydays, as well as how discharged employees receive their final paycheck. So we added within the two pay dates a month to be defined as not more than 16 days apart. And then we've also clarified that we do not mail out a final paycheck to a discharged employee, but rather they're paid through direct deposit or through a rapid pay card, which is also an ACH direct deposit to that pay card. And those are the two changes.
Any comments from fellow governing board members? Mr. Sandoval?
Yeah, sorry. Just a quick question, Michelle, Ms. Myers.
Yes.
So not more than 16 days apart in a month's time. So what about that? I mean, last paycheck, the end of the month, and then going into the following month, you know, that first paycheck. I mean, is there a thought around, can that exceed the 16 days, I guess is what I'm saying, that last paycheck to your first check in the subsequent month?
President Ceja Martinez, Mr. Sandoval, we do publish a pay date calendar each year, and we do honor the requirement of two pay dates a month. And your question specifically is asking if you cross into the next month, would that be impacted by the 16 days? I don't believe so, because we're stating here that it would not be more than 16 days apart.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the changes for this policy section. Yep. So we can move along to DN, which is school properties disposition. And there is one advisory for this policy section. It's policy advisory number 632. And it references House Bill 2460, where the legislature has modified Arizona Revised Statute 15189 pertaining to a school district selling or leasing property to a charter school or private school in the same manner that they would sell or lease property to any other buyer or lessee. And what the language is stating is two things. It's referencing compliance with policy FCB and retirement of facilities that are detailed in Arizona Revised Statute 15189. And then further down, there's one clarification that's added that it will reference charter school or private school. And those are the two changes for that policy section.
Any comments by my governing board members? This one is good.
Well, thank you. Then we'll continue on to policy FCB, which is the retirement of facilities. And House Bill 2460 modified Arizona Revised Statute 15189 to ensure that whenever a school district decides to sell or lease a vacant or unused building or a vacant and unused portion of a building, the school district may not prohibit a charter school or a private school from negotiating to buy or lease the property. So that's the additional language, and the red additional text highlights that, and it basically states that a school district has to entertain offers from charters and private schools, and they cannot be excluded. However, if they're not the highest offer or bidder, you don't have to move forward with the offer, but you can't exclude them because they're a charter or private school.
I have to comment on this one.
Ms. Kanang.
We don't have a choice on whether or not we as the district can approve this because this is state law. I think this is the most egregious of all the ones that came down this year. What this says is if we had a property or properties that were no longer of use to us, if we decided to sell it, we could do so, and that would lessen the tax burden because it would have the effect of lessening our bonds if we decided to sell a property. But we, of course, wouldn't want to put a charter school or a private school in our backyard because that would take away from the student population that we are already serving. This actually would force us to either hold on to a property that we couldn't use and we couldn't give back to our community, or sell it to a competitor. And the caveat in there, well, you wouldn't have to because you could pull it back. You couldn't pull it back just because it's a private school, but that is, or a charter school, that is the reason we would pull it back. And so what this does is it ties the hands of a school district from making a good decision, a good fiscally sound decision on behalf of its taxpayers, because it's a lose-lose situation. And I am really disappointed that we're forced to have to approve this policy because it's state law.
Any other comments?
Thank you. I believe we're approaching the last agenda item for this section of the policy audit, and that's policy GBEAA. And this is the companion policy to the first policy we started with, talking about conflict of interest in board members. This is the staff conflict of interest policy advisory 621. And with this advisory, language has been added to the policy to clarify conflict of interest. In February of 2018, policy advisory number 603 was added, added language to GBEAAE, staff conflict of interest, updating this exhibit to more closely reflect the conflict of interest disclosure memorandum that's contained in the Attorney General Arizona Agency Handbook. And this was a result of changes in House Bill 2663 related to procurement and the focus on conflict of interest with purchasing and public school districts. And so the language is in red again, and it does mirror very closely the language in the governing board related policy. But in a nutshell, it's defining refrain. What that means is not just at the end when a decision has been made, but rather at all points, from discussion to conversations to identifying if a need exists. That's part of refrain from participating in any manner. It also does state that it's not just a gift, but a gift or benefit. And then there's additional language as described in policy DJ purchasing ethics policy, tying back to some of the penalties now that are part of this overall policy with conflict of interest and vendor gifts. And if we continue on, there's also that reference to annual training and a requirement for annual training, as well as an annual disclosure each year regarding if an employee has a substantial interest in a vendor or district activity relationship, and that they would then need to disclose that conflict and recuse themselves from any participation with activities related to the disclosed event.
Can I ask a question about that one? So if a teacher says, man, we need more chairs in my classroom, that's against the rules?
President Ceja Martinez, Mrs. Connect, a staff member would be asked to identify if either themselves or a relative, and that's basically
So it's
spouse,
only if
et
they have
cetera.
a financial interest. It's not just it's speaking in general. Okay.
That's correct. If they have a family member themselves, a material interest, a significant interest, et cetera, they do need to disclose it. But also, folks will disclose if a spouse, say, is an employee of a vendor that comes and brings food to that particular school where they work.
Understood.
Because they should then remove themselves from any part of the procurement process from a requisition on up.
Got it. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Any comments? No comments. Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That concludes first reads. I appreciate that. Now we're moving on to 8.12, report and discussion on local, state, and federal legislative issues and activities. Mr. Savoy.
Thank you, President Ceja Martinez. Myself and Ms. Myers conversed on this earlier today. We have nothing to report at this time.
Thank you. Number 9.1, budget information reports. 9.1, budget facilities planning and construction report. They can be viewed online. 9.2, report on upcoming meetings and events. And again, with the efficiency of my board clerk and our superintendent, those are the dates and times. Oh, here I'm going a little fast. For the events, opening of schools, Labor Day, anything else we need to add, Miss Airy? All right. Other business, 10.1, draft agenda for September 13th. Again, just restate that. I'm really proud that any parents or community members want to know what's coming up. This is what we're looking at going forward. I will note I will not be here. I will be in an emergency policy training. So please feel free if you have any questions. Address all the governing board members. Moving on to 10.2, request for agenda items for the future. Ms. Connect.
Not tonight.
Ms. Pangarelli.
No.
Mr. Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you.
And I do not have any. All right, number 11.1, adjournment. I need a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
I second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0 and 1 absent. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Have a wonderful evening.